to Books Cyber Convention. We are beginning to talk about all the things that you're going to be able to experience during this convention. And one of those things will be our panel discussions, which will be hosted by Aurelia Casey. She is an author who is about to release her first book in her intrigue series called The Necromancer of Many Faces. She's also a podcaster. She has 2 very good podcasts out right now, the Virtual Book Club, or Aurelia's Virtual Book Club, and the Story Time with Aurelia Marie Casey. And you want to check her out at amcasey.com. Join her Purple Court. It's going to give you all the information about her. And here's Aurelia. Let's talk about podcasting, or let's talk about panels. Sorry. Let's talk about panels. So Friday morning, we begin with the romance panel, which starts at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Pacific. Tell us a little bit about what the romance panel is going to be.
So the romance panel is going to be just sort of a lighthearted, what is it about reading about these romances that we really love? Like you know, the big romance thing is, you know, would you really want to get with that guy or that girl? Like, are you invested in the romance because of who the people are, or because you wish you were the person in the story? You know what I mean? So it'll be kind of like, I think it'll be kind of fun. And yeah, so that's what I'm thinking, but you never know. These discussions could go in any direction. And it's worth mentioning that there are going to be threads in the fairgrounds on Goodreads for each of these panels. If you have a question you want to ask or a comment you want to make about any of these panels, you know, you can post it in there whenever you want, and then I'll be keeping track on Twitter right before the panel starts. So if you want to tweet a question, you can tweet it to @AureliaMCasey and use the hashtag B2BSciCon, and I'll see that. But only if you post it right before the discussion. If you're posting something about like zombies on Friday morning, I'm like not going to see it when it comes time to zombies. So yeah.
Would you say that the romance panel talk about people's guilty pleasure with these kind of stories?
It might get there. I mean, it could, right? Like, yeah. Some of it is an escape, and some of it is wishing that real life were as easy as a romance relationship is, and some of it is like, well, why can't they just see that they're like really in love with each other? Why are they making this so much more difficult for themselves than it needs to be? What's wrong with them? Right?
Right on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then we move right from there till 3 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. or noon Pacific, I should say, the memoir panel. Why don't you go tell us a little bit about that panel?
Yeah, so the memoir panel I think is going to be a little bit darker. So we have 2 panels that are going to be pretty similar. There's the memoir panel and there's the domestic violence awareness panel. And I think they're going to be pretty similar because of the people that I'm looking at being on those panels. But I think it's going to be talking about how do you take the events that happened in your life and turn it into a story that has some form of like meaningfulness to it at the end, even if you as the person feel like you're just living your life and stuff happens and changes. How does that change translate into a story that could inspire someone else to improve their own situation?
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then we move from that to the panel at 5 p.m. Pacific, genre of writing. What is entail for us for that panel?
So the multicult, or well, we have the steampunk first, right?
Yeah.
And then So the steampunk, I'm not entirely sure what the steampunk is going to be. What I'm hoping it's going to be is like an introduction to steampunk, because I think a lot of readers, steampunk stories, the steampunk stories I've read are just fantastic and amazing, and I love them. But I also happen to have a background in engineering, so like when they start talking about these gadgets, I can visualize them very quickly because I know how gears work, right? Um, and I think that's not true of a lot of people. So I'm kind of hoping that that panel can be a place where you can ask all of your questions of like, I don't understand what steampunk is, or I don't understand how this technology works, and maybe we can enlighten you enough that you're comfortable trying out one of the more um, light steampunks, the ones with the where the technology is sort of incorporated more gradually into the story so that there's more time for you to get accustomed to it and stuff like that. I really want it to be something that opens people to that genre in a way that sometimes is really difficult.
So it's going to be more of an exploratory or explaining the genre
Yeah, I think
itself,
so.
not kind of going into the history or anything like that, but just
Well, it might go
yeah,
into the history of like,
that's
you
awesome
know,
because I think
steampunk is what if during Victorian times we had gone mechanical instead of electrical in terms of technology, right? So it's got a lot of sci-fi parallels to it, but there's also, how do we combine mechanical machinery with magic? Like there's that whole it's a very blended genre.
mhm.
So it feels like fantasy sometimes, even when it's really pure science fiction, but because it's science fiction about the past instead of science fiction about the future, it can confuse people sometimes. So I want it to be an overview and an explanation and then a discussion of what makes something steampunk and why and how can we make that more accessible to you. Yeah.
Awesome,
Yeah.
awesome. So then we move from that to the multicultural hour, I guess we could call it in the panel discussion at 7
Yeah.
p.m. Eastern time, 4 p.m. Pacific.
I'm really looking forward to that
How
one
did
because
that going to,
how did it what? Sorry, I interrupted
I mean,
you.
what's that going to entail?
So that one I'm really looking forward to that one. There's this um there's all of this controversy sometimes amongst writers about, the race, the ethnicity of characters and how you describe it and what and there's a little bit of a conflict sometimes too between authors and especially the traditional publishers, like the big ones, where they decide the genre based on the race or ethnicity of the author and or the race or ethnicity of the character, and it just doesn't make any sense to me personally. So I'm kind of hoping to get some conversation about that, about how do we incorporate more cultural diversity into our writing? How do we convince people that just because it has someone who isn't white on the cover, that doesn't mean it needs to go in this little special category where nobody's ever going to find it, right? Like there are lots of
Absolutely.
really amazing works by people who aren't white, who are, everything else, and they deserve to be seen just as much, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it could even boundaries of where you're at, like, the South, versus the North and ideas like that as well.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
there's a
Like
lot, there's a lot of
it's not just the ethnicity and the race, but also the cultural elements that go with that. And how do you break down those cultural barriers to convince people to be more open-minded and more willing to try something despite their own prejudices, whatever those may be.
Are you going to touch on gender at all too? Maybe
Yeah,
with
probably.
our
Yeah. I mean, the Necromancer of Many Faces has a lot of gender, sexuality, weird stuff going on. um, well, it's not really weird to them. It was weird to me when I was writing it. I thought it was going to be simple and straightforward, and like there's one couple that's gay and one guy that's bi, and like the rest are all straight in that particular story. But like then there was other stuff that was weird that was unrelated to sexual orientation. And it took me a little bit of time to come to terms with that. So yeah, I mean, we'll see how much we can get to in 1 hour for that one.
Sure.
But there's definitely a lot to cover, and I'm excited to see what gets brought up. Um, yeah.
So then Saturday, I think a lot of people are going to enjoy Saturday because that's really getting into the heart of writing in terms of, I mean, Friday is great to set up the stage, but Saturday we start right off the bat with world building at 1 p.m. Eastern time, 10 Pacific, and it just goes from there. So talk about world building and what kind of things we can.
So in my high school, we had a week before spring break that was like class, but not real class. Um, and this one year, my history professor did like it was like 8 hours a day for 5 days, and it was like his he taught it exactly like he taught his European history classes, but it was Tolkien. It was the Lord of the Rings, right? And like that class was full. Like there were people who were sad because they hadn't like gotten in, right? So I'm hoping that the world building panel is a little bit like that, of how, getting a hint behind the scenes of how these fantasy authors go about creating worlds that you just want to live in them, and you want to get lost in them, and you want them to like get deals so that there's movies, and you want them to get deals so that there's video games, so that you can live in that world as much as possible, right? So I'm hoping it'll be kind of like exciting like that.
You think you'll get into technical aspects like, you know, how they reference certain things, and how they dictionary and kind
Yeah,
of
so
kinds
that
of
same that
stuff.
same professor, that same history professor, his thing was linguistics, and so he had an elective my senior year of high school on linguistics, and I used one of my fantasy worlds that I haven't published anything in yet, but I used that world and his class, and I used his class as an excuse to write the language for that world. So I thought I had lost it. I was really sad. I thought I'd lost it, and I was packing to come to Austin for this conference, and I found it right before I came. So I like copied it. So now I have two copies. One is on me. Um, but I have a grammar and I have a dictionary. So I might, go into that a little bit in that panel. See if anyone else is as
Nice.
geeky as me.
I think you're going to find that this discussion could go off the rails pretty quickly.
It could, it could, it
There's
could go
so
in
much to it.
circles. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And then it goes right into the heroine's journey, which is the next panel at 3 p.m.
Yeah, so I'm excited about that one. I've talked, I learned about the heroine's journey from this author, Kelly McClymer. And she has a fairy tale romance series it's not what you would expect of a historical romance. It's a little bit more, there's almost more a mystery in the romance than most readers would expect, but they're really amazing books. And then she's got a mystery series, and she's working right now on a fantasy science fiction style one. It's almost like a superhero story. Um, but that's in her Evertwixt world. But she was talking to me a lot about um, mythology and the hero's journey and the heroine's journey, and how you can use all of these elements to really give a lot of depth to your characters and your worlds. And so I was reading some of the material she had recommended to me, and looking at the difference between the heroine's journey and the hero's journey. And like at first I was a little bit annoyed, because like you think, oh, well, in order to have a hero's journey, you have to be a guy, and in order to have a heroine's journey, you have to be a woman. But like, I don't think that's true. I think there's a lot of things you can do to play with all of this stuff. So it's just going to be like an intellectual discussion of, okay, what we're going to explain what the hero's journey is and what the heroine's journey is, and then talk about how, maybe give some examples of how it's used in popular works, and then how you could use it, um, by like almost mixing and matching pieces, or having like one person could have both a hero's journey and a heroine's journey, right? Like
Right.
it's not as linear as I think people might expect.
Are you going to go into some depths about writing strong women and creating a character like that?
Maybe. I think though, if you have a personality that has depth, and then you give them the right kinds of situations, it's almost impossible not to have a strong woman though.
Cool.
But at the same time, sometimes the point is to write about someone who's not strong, you
Who
know,
finds that?
right?
That's
Who either
part of the
finds
journey.
the strength or fails to find the strength for some reason,
That's an
you
interesting
know?
dichotomy. That sounds really fun. That sounds like a good one.
Yeah.
Um, so at 5 o'clock Eastern to 2 p.m. And 2 p.m. Pacific, we get into, again, you were talked about it, or you alluded to it earlier, a serious topic in domestic violence.
Yeah, so I put that out because there were a few authors I knew in the um, in the collective of authors who are participating, who have written either memoirs or fiction about women who have been in bad situations and needed to get out. And I curate an anthology every year of short stories and poems on domestic violence. And so this panel is really going to be a place where we can talk about the statistics and the stories, and how the numbers by themselves don't actually cause change to happen. But sometimes the stories by themselves don't cause change to happen either, because you're looking at one unique circumstance, right? And you're not bridging the gap between, okay, this one person had this one experience
Mm-hmm.
and that was horrible, but how do we take that example and understand the statistics better? So okay, that one person had that one horrible experience, but 1 in 4 people have similar experiences to that,
Kind of
and you
same.
don't know about it because they don't
Right.
want to talk about it, because they don't feel safe to talk about it.
Kind of along the lines of how you ended Friday with the multicultural panel. This panel going to kind of give sense to some authors or writers or even readers about how to approach the subject of domestic violence within writing and not be taboo, or kind of how to walk
Well,
that line.
I think the how to not be taboo is just to talk about it. It makes people uncomfortable to talk about it, but we need to talk about it anyway. And we have to be okay with making people uncomfortable, because that's the only way you're ever going to make anything change. And there's a difference between making someone like upset and making someone uncomfortable, right? Like you don't want to close someone down and make them completely shut themselves off from the idea at all. But you don't want them to be comfortable about it, because it's not a topic where you're supposed to be comfortable about it, right? You're supposed to be uncomfortable about it, and you should be uncomfortable enough that you want to do something that's helpful and constructive without being so disoriented and distraught that you're incapable of doing anything. So it is a little bit of a fine line, you're right.
Hmm. Awesome. We go from there at 7 p.m. Eastern. We end the day 4 p.m. Pacific with the paranormal panel. A very popular topic. I'm sure this will get a lot of.
Yeah, I'm excited about this. I have a story in the works that's paranormal, so I'm excited to see what everyone wants to talk about for that one. I mean, this could devolve into a vampires versus werewolf debate, or it could be about all of the other underrepresented paranormal creatures out there. I just met someone the other day who writes about um, bear shifters. And apparently, this is a whole like subcategory of paranormal that I didn't really know about. I mean, I knew that there were a lot of bear shifters in fairy tales, like the original fairy tales have them, but I didn't know that there was like a bunch of paranormal romance with bears. That's a thing apparently. So hopefully we'll get to.
I have a question right off the bat for you that you can ask your panel,
Okay.
and it's, what the hell happened to the good old fashioned ghost story? Why
I
are
think
we?
they still exist. They're just like harder to find because all of the rest of it is drowning it out in all the noise.
I
Yeah.
totally agree. So I think your panel would
Actually,
just
there's a
jump
really
right
good,
off
I'm
the
going to give a
page.
shout out right now. Ashley Capes has this fantastic ghost story. It's called A Whisper of Leaves. I read it. It's like a novella. It won't take you too long to read it, but it is fantastic and amazing and the best ghost story ever. If you liked Spirited Away, you will love A Whisper of Leaves. So, shout out to Ashley.
Awesome. Right on. Way to go, Ashley. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, for me, paranormal. That's what that typically starts with. I mean, growing up, campfire stories and then Ghostbusters and beyond all of that, and it all evolving into what it's evolved into today. But I was
Yeah.
because I probably for that because a lot of the right about that stuff. So I want to hear what about that.
Yeah. Yeah. That is an interesting thing to think about. I mean, I think of paranormal as witches and vampires and werewolves and stuff, because, well,
Well, it's
mostly
evolved
because
to that.
it has evolved to that. But like, I read good books, and I didn't even think of categorizing my books by genre until I was in the middle of high school. And then my genre categories for my books on my bookshelves at home are completely random. There's like literary fiction, which I classify as anything remotely similar to what I would have read in school. So like there's Shakespeare and there's Alexander Dumas and there's Thomas Hardy and there's like a whole bunch of other random stuff that's I'm not actually literary fiction at all. It just is like real life fiction, I guess. And then there's fantasy that's pure fantasy. And then there's science fiction, and then there's what I call historical fiction, which is like anything that has any relevance or any parallel to the real world would fall into that category for me. So like Harry Potter for me is historical fiction.
I understood.
So my genres are just completely weird, and I like learned what paranormal romance was um, in college when other people were talking about it like that. But for me, it was just historical fiction.
You've done
So
this broadcasting thing. I'm sorry. I was going to say, I think you've done this broadcasting thing before because you just segued perfectly into Sunday,
oh,
which
I
is
did.
really all about,
That's
yeah, which
awesome.
is really all about
I didn't.
genres.
I didn't. I didn't do that on purpose.
We'll let the audience know that you didn't, but I think subconsciously maybe
Maybe
because
something.
Sunday's all about genres, and it starts with probably the it thing to start with in all, and that is at noon Eastern time, 9 Pacific, the zombies.
Yeah, I did that because Angela insisted. Um, I'm not a huge zombie person in general. I tried The Walking Dead and like got nightmares for the first time in 20 years, and then I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna do that anymore. So I actually have no idea what this zombies panel is gonna be. Um, I'm yeah,
I think it'll
it'll
probably run
probably be
itself.
awesome for people who
Yeah.
like zombies, but I don't even know what to expect.
It's the it's so I think you'll have no problem. You probably won't even speak during this whole hour, probably.
Probably.
So then we
Well,
move.
I'll field questions from the Goodreads and from Twitter and
Yeah,
stuff.
sure, sure. Uh, so we move into 2 p.m. and a subject close to my heart at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 Pacific, which is detectives and the mystery stories.
Yeah. I want to talk about like you know how there are those like tropes about detectives that really stem from film noir
Hmm.
and like how people are changing them now, but they're like alluding to them still as like almost a satire. You know, like if you think about Castle and his like mystery writer buddies, they're sort of being stereotypical without being stereotypical in a way. Um, and it's sort of fun to have that referencing going on without it making it boring. So like there's so much breadth of stuff to talk about for that one.
Yeah, and I know it's not a novel. Well, it might have been a novel. I don't know if it was a novel or not, but I actually had a discussion with somebody in my show about a particular movie that I found that did exactly what you're talking about, called Brick, and it's all used noir slang and a classic detective story to tell their story, which is really phenomenal writing. But sorry, I digress. I went off the reservation a little bit there. Sorry.
That's okay.
But so then we go into the science and science fiction at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 Pacific, which I'm sure is another very healthy topic that people
Yeah,
are.
so that's going to be a little bit like the world building one and a little bit like the steampunk one at the same time. I'm really hoping that it'll be helping to make the science that people use in science fiction more accessible. This is creatives taking what's currently available and imagining what the future is going to be like. Um,
Is it going to have? Are you going to talk about accuracies and science equations and things like that? I
we
mean,
might
that
a
sounds
little
boring.
bit. We might a little bit, but we'll try not to get too technical. I want it to I want to bridge the gap between the technical stuff and what people understand and make it so that you can read the science fiction and understand some of the technical uh, detective work that went into it that makes it feel more real, um, and then make it sort of understandable how, okay, if you had the right background in the right field, you could take this story and see the vision of the future that it's showing, and then build the technology to bring us there. I think a lot of that happened in the past 2 decades with Star Trek and Star Wars and Apple. You know, we have the little buttons where you push the button and then you can say, "Hey, computer, get me so and so." Like that's what Siri is, right?
Right?
And
Sure.
20 years ago, that was a figment of Gene Roddenberry's imagination.
Well, just the Star Trek. Just to give Star Trek an example, they have the little communicators. I mean, that's all of our
Yeah,
phones now.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's going to be a fun panel.
Well,
And
there's
then
more
we
there's more Star Trek stuff that's happening, but a lot of it just isn't. It's not. You don't know that it's Star Trek inspired because it's not talked about. It's not marketed that way by the marketers because the marketers never watched Star Trek. But the engineers all did. Like when I was in school and college, all of my friends watched Star Trek all the time, and like we would have conversations of like, which engineer from Star Trek do you want to be? So yeah,
cool. And then we end our convention and our panel discussions at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific with the epic fantasy, which I think is going to be a well attended panel.
yeah. So that's gonna be a lot of fun, but I don't even know where to start with explaining what it's going to be because there's so much epic fantasy out there. Um, I think it'll be a lot of, what makes epic fantasy epic as opposed to high fantasy as opposed to just normal fantasy. And I think it'll be a lot of what's your favorite epic fantasy that inspired your epic fantasy, and what is it about epic fantasy that really draws us in, you know.
But isn't and also for epic fantasy, there's a lot of rules to making it an epic fantasy, is there not? I mean, there's a lot of things you have to if
I don't
you're
know. I don't pay attention to rules, so so I could be
okay.
wrong. um,
I could be wrong too. I don't know. I'm just I'm trying to think of
I
what.
feel like it sounds like the sort of thing where there would be a lot of rules, but to me, it's the emotion of it. It's the adventure and the like saving the world, and it has that feeling that like in the Middle Ages, like in with Charlemagne, there was courtly love and there was adventure and there was honor and there was this this philosophy that you fight for what you believe in and you do it in an honorable way. And to me, epic fantasy has that emotional feeling to it, even if like none of the rest of the details are there.
Awesome. Well, I want to just tell everybody that, along with what Aurelia said earlier about asking questions, you can post questions to Twitter. We'll remind everybody where to go and do that. But um, during the live feeds that I will be conducting, I will also remind everybody when the panels are going to begin and when you need to get your questions in so that you can get your question asked in a timely manner, because once the panels start, it's going to go pretty quickly and you won't have time to get your question in. Most like I want to do that ahead of time and tell everybody once again where they can.
So for if like if you're listening to this right now and you have a question about something, go to the Goodreads fairgrounds and find the panels and the events and post your questions there, because those posts will have a time duration that Twitter won't have. Now, if you're thinking about this right before a panel or like at the right at the beginning of a panel, you can tweet me at Aurelia M. Casey with the hashtag B2B SciCon, and I'll see those posts. I'll be monitoring them in real time. So make sure if you're going to use Twitter that you post it in real time. Otherwise, it'll get lost in all the other posts.
And we should also mention that all these panels are going to take place in Google Hangouts. Are you going to have the chat feature available for people during that time frame?
I'm not sure. Probably not. I think I was having a lot of trouble the other day when I was doing my book club discussion because the internet was a little bit slow. And um, what I'm gonna be doing during the convention is I'm gonna have my desktop with the Google Hangout. I'm gonna have my laptop with everything else. So I don't want to jinx the hangout by having the chat open. So just be using Twitter and Goodreads. I think that's less confusing. And the videos will be embedded everywhere. You'll be able to see them on the Facebook event and Goodreads and on YouTube and Google Plus as well. So those will be
And if
everywhere.
you miss a panel, yeah. And if you missed the panel and you'd like to see it, we'll also be broadcasting those at some point later in the evening. I'll rerun them through the live feed. And so you can relive the panel if you miss something or if they reference a website or anything like that, you'll be able to go back and watch it. And,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
everybody
Well,
will have.
the other thing is once all of the people, all of the authors participating in the panels are in the Google Hangout, and I know that they're live and they're on, I will post the links to their booths everywhere. So you'll be able to go follow up with those particular authors um, from Google Plus, from Facebook, from Goodreads. Yeah.
And all the chats will post to your website, your YouTube channel as well. So if you miss it during the convention, you can
Yeah,
go
so
back
I'll make
there.
a special playlist on my Aurelia Maria Casey YouTube channel. That's just for these panels. And you'll be able to go there to check them out too. Yeah.
And Goodreads, I'll post when the rebroadcast will happen as well on my site during the live feed, so that you can plan ahead, just so that if you missed it, you can see it then. And then if you miss it after that, then Aurelia's YouTube channel will be where you can get those. All right, everybody. So that's the panel discussions. Thank you, Aurelia, for your time.
Yeah.
And these sound awesome. It's going to be a lot of fun.
I'm really excited.
Very
Yeah.
cool. So everybody, that's it. And we'll see you at the convention.